You can have everyone that's working on partnerships sitting together and reporting in the same line. But ultimately, a lot of those professional staff are doing work with and for an academic. And so a lot of the interactions will come directly to them. And it's your job to get those relationships from that initial conversation into something meaningful.
Hello, and welcome to the Partnerships podcast series by UIIN. I'm Sarah Jabber, Director at UIIN, and your host for today. For this episode, I spoke with Professor Dan Johnson, Vice-Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Enterprise at Macquarie University. We spoke about what it takes to turn external engagement into a coordinated institution-wide strategy. Drawing on Macquarie's history and its unique position within an innovation district, Dan shares how the university is working to align partnerships, professionalize engagement, and move from fragmented interactions to a more joined-up experience for partners. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Professor Dan Johnson, who's Vice-Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Enterprise at Macquarie University, based in Australia. Welcome, Dan.
Sarah, nice to be with you.
I'll just tell you a little bit before we kick off. So Dan leads a portfolio spanning research strategy, innovation, commercialization, entrepreneurship, engagement and partnerships, a big portfolio, but really focused on connecting Macquarie's research strengths with external partners and translating research and innovation into impact, making Macquarie more seamlessly engaged with the outside world. And I'm really excited to have you here, Dan, because it's a topic that I think many universities struggle with. How do you make external engagement more strategic? How do you make universities more connected? It's not so much a lack of activity, it's probably more around how do you connect all those different dots and really deliver that experience. So we're going to dig into your experience a little bit and learn about how Macquarie is approaching this. And maybe just to kick off and understand a bit more, we use the term external engagement as an umbrella, but it can span so many different parts, whether it's across research, innovation, enterprise, partnerships, commercialization. So I'm really curious, what does your research, innovation, and enterprise portfolio look like in practice? And how does it play, or what role does it play in supporting engagement across Macquarie?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So Macquarie University was founded in the 1960s. It was a new university adjacent to an innovation district. And the concept was really the first of its kind in Australasia. It's become known as Macquarie Park Innovation District. It's a 6.8 square kilometre site that has more than 300 companies as well as the university. And it's importantly one of the more economically significant of its kind. It's a bit under $10 billion US dollars of annual turnover. It's a bit under $500 million US dollars in R&D investment, 60,000 knowledge workers, that kind of thing. So the scale is quite significant. And interestingly, at least in our market, in our country, the university owns its own land, which means it's able to create relationships with even companies that are not just next door in an innovation district, but actually co-located physically on the same site under multi-decadal partnerships. So it creates a kind of vibrant academia, industry, community interface. So all of that influences the university's culture, from which strategy comes. Culture influences that materially, and in its outputs. So relatively unusually, Macquarie University generates more of income for research from industry than it does from government. That's not that common in the global university landscape. And of course, it's built on hundreds and hundreds of separate university industry partnerships. And so right from the beginning and the foundation of the university, external engagement or a need to be plugged into the community and with industry was at the heart of its reason for existence, its reason for being. But in practice, through that journey, universities are all about people, because the key asset that a third party, a partner, is wishing to work with, those assets, those people are highly mobile, they're independent, they appropriately operate under principles of academic freedom and integrity, but also they operate, many of them, under a sole trader sort of mindset. And so there's heaps of positives about that. It's led to countless discoveries, the foundation of much of what we experience in society, how we live and travel and work and so on. But when you're trying to engage with third parties, what that can come across as is uncoordinated and disjointed. And so what we've been told in the past, and what even the University Vice-Chancellor has been told from our local district and beyond, is that both from Macquarie and from, in fact, all unis, they're just frustrated about what is this apparent lack of alignment or knowledge sharing. So on a Monday, they hear about a request for a philanthropic donation. On a Tuesday, about a student internship. On a Wednesday, about a research project. You get the idea. And so their ask of us, and all universities, is to better coordinate and align our partnership efforts. Mm-hmm. So the strategic intent of the Macquarie University engagement strategy is to professionalise and coordinate our engagement efforts. That's to harness the power of those bottom-up organic connections that are happening all the time. That's the basis of the sustainable partnerships, but to ensure that happens within a framework of institutional knowledge sharing and awareness. The overall objective is that the experience of a third party is that the university is joined up, aligned, easy to work with.
Yeah, thanks. You touched on a few really interesting and important topics and some keywords. So you talked about culture, people. I think that history plays a really important role. As you said, from the start, it was engaged with industry, engaged with the community. And so it's not, some universities, they're going down a certain pathway and then suddenly they're trying to shift to something else. Whereas it sounds like you had this vision from the start, so that I can imagine makes it a bit, don't want to say it's easy, but maybe slightly less challenging than other institutions that are really trying to move from a traditional way of working to engaging with the outside world. But you also talked about the importance of people and those relationships that they have. And we're going to touch on that a little bit more, but maybe just to build on this strategic intent or that strategy. Sometimes organizations can really just use that word. Oh, we have a strategy where we have a vision for what we want to achieve. But we sometimes find it doesn't always translate into how do you actually do things in practice. So from your perspective, what would you say distinguishes a real external engagement strategy, one that is actually translated into priority structures and ways of working from just ideas or a collection of individual activities?
It's a good question. In designing what we have here at Macquarie, I found that there was a community around the world that had put a lot of deep thought into this, and they were further ahead on their journey than we were. So I spoke to a lot of people, a lot of nations about their experience. And I took little bits, little elements of many of them. But then we also came back and thought very deeply about what was unique about the Macquarie environment. There wasn't a single other model that we found that we could just plant here. It was the fact that we were an innovation district, we had co-located companies. It was the fact we owned our own land and we could make choices about what to do with that. And it was about the fact that we owned and operated a hospital, which is unusual in our country. It was also about culture. So one of the things the university prides itself on is having very low barriers to collaboration. People actually like each other. They actually talk and work on interdisciplinary projects and degrees that span faculties and so on. So when you combine all these best practice examples from around the world, plus a few things that are unique to your environment, that's how we've gone about building what we have. But all of that would only be possible if you have the ear and the strategic support of the Vice-Chancellor. If you don't have that, plus all of those cultural settings to implement, these are long-term plays. People who are ahead of Macquarie on this journey have said that, particularly when it comes to things like CRM systems and the behaviour change that you need to get that, these are decadal type returns on investment. So you need that top-down support to really sustain the investment and the thinking and the strategy and the resources that follow. And thankfully, in terms of consistency and support for the strategy, the message I mentioned earlier about companies saying, look, Macquarie University, all your universities, align yourselves, come to us in a coordinated way. That message was also conveyed very strongly directly to the Vice-Chancellor. So we act with a mandate from him. Mm-hmm. And that permeates right through the whole executive group and through all the portfolios and faculty. So it's a combination of sort of best practice, culture, and a sort of institutional mandate that's enabled us to get to where we are. And we're very much still on a journey to implement.
Yeah, it's always a journey, right?
Always.
Can you tell us more about this kind of, if I think about your title, so research, innovation, and enterprise, and as I said in my intro, it spans, from collaboration, partnerships through to commercialization. What was maybe different universities structured these areas in different ways? You talked about how you've set it up in one portfolio. Can you just tell us a bit more about how is it structured? You don't need to go into too much detail, but what kind of teams do you have working in this area and how do they connect with each other?
Yes, so the capabilities in what we're calling our research, innovation and enterprise team are those involved in external partnerships. It's mostly professional staff, those supporting the faculty, the academics in external partnerships, business development, IP management, the translation and commercialization of ideas, entrepreneurship training, startup creation, incubation of startups, and early stage equity investment from an internal university controlled fund. So that is collectively the university's capability. That was right size for our university because of our size and what the strategy was that we were trying to implement. I think it would be trickier if you were a much bigger university to try and put those capabilities all together. For us, it's been successful so far. We're still on a journey. Part of this, the reason that we've brought those capabilities together is that a feature of a number of our university partnerships, and indeed a preferred type of partnership, is that they're sticky. They remain in place when people from either side, the university or the third party, move on, so they're sustained. And the best way to achieve that is that rather than having a single group or academic or faculty working with an external partner, that happens organically and there's plenty of that. But at an institutional level, that we try and build partnerships with lots of connection points. So it's research and education. It's multiple faculties, multiple individuals at a senior level and mid and junior level in those faculties. Sometimes with physical infrastructure and physical facilities, more than one project leader. All of those things help to create those stickier relationships. And so by having the professional staff that are involved in those disparate points of contact with partners, we have a better ability to have them sitting next to each other and water cooler conversations and so on that help them be aware of all the opportunities to build stronger, more diversified partnerships and then sustain them over time. Mm. I should also note, though, that there's sometimes a tension between this sort of central capability, which is what we have. We do try and operate it. Yes, it's a central facility. Yes, central reporting line, but there's also a strong hub and spoke element to it. Many of the people the capabilities I've just described are also embedded in faculty processes, committees and so on. They spend at least part of their week working from a site in a faculty because both a central coordination and alignment and best practice and a community of practice is critical, as is an awareness of all the opportunities and being embedded in and seen as part of the faculty thinking. You can't really have either. You have to have both in order to be a success.
Yeah, I like the term you use, sticky partnerships. And you can almost say the same internally. And from what you've described, we sometimes, that central versus, decentralized or whatever we want to call it, that hub and spoke model, sometimes when you visualize it, it can look very linear in a way, but it's probably, some people have described it more like a spider web. You have all these interconnections and you really need to have that strong communication, I would imagine, to be able to provide that kind of coordinated front. How is that going for you? Does it help that you all sit in one unit, do you think? Or what is the secret ingredient?
We're very much on a journey, and I like the spider web analogy. That's a good one because that's in practice exactly what it is like. Our university, like every university I've observed, is large and complex and hard to navigate for the external parties. So you can have everyone that's working on partnerships sitting together and reporting in the same line. But ultimately, a lot of those professional staff are doing work with and for in partnership with an academic, a faculty member. And so a lot of the interactions will come directly to them in the first instance. And so you can standardize and coordinate and centralize as much as you like. Ultimately, you have to have a very high tolerance for ambiguity in this area because the ideas and the leads and the relationships are going to happen organically all over the place. And it's your job to just be as professional, as coordinated as possible as you can to get those relationships from that, initial conversation into something meaningful. Maybe it starts with a small project and trust and so on, then over time builds into something that's hopefully institution level and sustained.
Yeah, it's not about control, right? That's not the aim. It's about facilitating and dealing with ambiguity.
Yeah, and for someone, rarely do you have, every now and then, a partner's coming and wishing to work with me directly, right? I'm a facilitator to assets that the university has in the form of knowledge and people and research and talent and so on. That's really what the third party is after. So the objective is not to control that at all, but to facilitate it and support and harness all of that bottom-up and organic sort of natural things that are happening with these very large organizations like a uni, and then see, all right, how do you professionalize and coordinate that as best you can?
The UIIN Conference 2026, where universities, industry, and innovators meet to shape the future. Join us in Stockholm for 3 days of insight, inspiration, and impact. Hear from global thought leaders, expand your network, and be part of the conversations driving collaboration forward. Secure your place now at uiin.org/conference.
Maybe we can touch on, there's a question that's come through, and it's about, you mentioned it's a journey, it's never a smooth process, and I'm sure there's been lots of challenges and lots of, maybe at points, some resistance. This specific question was, in their institution, there's resistance to adopting a CRM. You talked about how sometimes things will still happen on an individual level, and then of course, that's going to continue to happen. It's not necessarily always a bad thing, but what are some areas of resistance or key challenges that you're facing or have faced?
I actually think one of the interesting challenges starts with the word engagement, because it means, so if you ask 100 different people across our university what that means, they would all have a slightly different definition. It's the sorts of things that we've talked about on this conversation: industry, government, community, partnerships. To some people, it means staff well-being, and others it means student recruitment, and even when you said, what does an industry partnership look like? It looks very different with a large pharma than a small quantum startup or a mid-sized for-profit compared to a small civic or community group. The partnership model is very different. Everyone has their own opinion. There are some challenges around even terminology and scope and so on. So some people, of course, will always see the relationships that they've built as theirs and reluctant to share. We see a little bit less of that at Macquarie. Those low barriers to collaboration are real. Yes, you do have pockets of resistance there, but mostly people are pretty good about sharing, and that helps a lot to think about institution first and discipline or portfolio second. The other area that can be challenging is if you're starting from a foundation of wanting to be as transparent as possible, at least at a leadership and professional staff level. And by that, I mean, it's very hard to tell the academic community what to do. They're going to do what they do, academic freedom being what it is, and that's great. So we can coordinate and influence the workload practices of professional staff and leadership. But when we've got a CRM, which I can touch on, that we're building to try and achieve that. But even amongst those groups, there are some things that are tricky to share, even though you start from a positive bias. The identity of donors, for example, and how much they're prepared to donate. Defence projects. Some projects require a security clearance. You just can't share that information. So even though you might start from an intent, it's difficult to say, right, we're going to build a CRM that's going to feature everything and everyone's going to be able to access it. Which maybe if I just segue slightly into that point. So my colleague, Katrina Avery, will actually speak at the UN conference in June on a relatively recent initiative, which we're calling Partner 360. The objective is to take, amongst other things, a series of previously disparate CRMs that were built for a primary purpose, like alumni or student internships or technical services or something, and integrate them into a single Salesforce instance. And so that's what we're calling Partner 360, so that even though you wish to solve your primary KPIs, you also can do that in the context of what else is going on at the university within the same database environment. And that's a resource that we hope, and it's very much in the build and test phase now to see if it will work. We're optimistic. But if it does, it's the sort of thing that we expect professional staff and leaders to use, but less so the academic community. They're going to kind of do what they're going to do anyway. And then we'll have resources to just basically keep that back-end system and communities of practice and so on that accompany it to try and keep those records updated as best we can. Again, so that anyone from the leadership who has a surprise visit from a partner or is about to make an approach or something can have a resource they consult and just get a snapshot of what's going on with that partner and be as professional as possible and as partner-friendly as possible when they interact.
Yeah, interesting. And to see how it goes. And people talk a lot about CRM, and it's one piece of the puzzle in the end. And it's about behaviors and culture and processes as well. What you said earlier about the definition of engagement, I think that's really interesting and it resonates a lot because it's such a language issue. People interpret it in different ways. Even what is a partnership can really vary across understanding. I'm also curious, from your perspective as a leader in this area. You talked earlier about the importance of, for example, having a Vice-Chancellor buy-in But from your perspective, in the role that you're in, what would you say is maybe the hardest part of making this work across the institution? And on the other hand, what signals or behaviors coming from someone like yourself do you think make the biggest difference in helping embed external engagement across the institution?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One where I'd start with that kind of leadership question is just to say it's an absolute honor, right? So you're working with the brightest people in the planet, and you're working backwards from real problems, and we try and opportunities. We try and operate with two ears and one mouth. You listen at least twice as much as you speak. Working back from those partner needs. It's not a particularly scalable way to operate, but it is more sustainable if you can come up with a bespoke solution for the partners with which you work. The biggest challenge, it took a long time to align around the strategy that the university has adopted. There were, at a leadership level, very strong opinions about what should happen. People come with experiences from other unis where they've seen it work well in this way or that way. And it was a combination of the top-down pressure from the Vice-Chancellor and that international best practice examples that I mentioned earlier, along with thinking very deeply about what is unique about the Macquarie environment. It was a combination of all of those things. And I probably took, it feels like half a dozen papers to our executive and consulted very widely within the university group and with the partner base before landing on the model that we have now. And it involved a change process to taking resources that were previously in different reporting lines and consolidate them all under a vision. And that's never easy to do that. You're always trying to make it so that it's not about people losing resources or others gaining it or whatever. It's much more, what's the purpose? The strategy of this is reflecting the culture of the institution. Okay, let's let culture eat strategy for breakfast. Let's start there, reflect deeply on that. Then we go strategy, and then we go structure after that. But that process took a really long time to implement. Mm-hmm. And what's happened subsequently is that as things that have been built on, for example, I mentioned that the team includes an early stage fund that we've actually haven't publicly launched it. This is about the first public record that we'll mention of it. We'll say some more about it in due course. But the fact that we've built that, this became the logical team to house it. And so it becomes something that kind of builds on itself once you've got the foundation there in place.
Thanks, Dan. Interesting to also hear about the process. And you mentioned when you and I were speaking, you've been at Macquarie for 6 years. It's, again, you said the term journey. It's not something that happens immediately. It takes time to build and implement. I want to touch on a couple more things in the time we have left. I want to talk a little bit about success. So what does success look like for the research, innovation, and enterprise portfolio? And maybe touching a bit on, not to talk about all indicators or how do you actually measure, but more around how do you balance. I find sometimes in this line of work, people can focus a lot on activities. So we measure activities or we measure dollars, but there's a lot of non-tangible outcomes that take time, like trust, partner experience, capability. How do you define success for your unit, and how do you measure that, or what is a good outcome for you?
Another excellent question. I always reflect on, there's an economist from the 1950s, Goodhart, I think his name was, but don't quote me on that, who said something like, when you can measure lots of things, but when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be useful. And I think deeply about that when we're trying to set up ways that will measure the value and the output or the achievements of the work we do. Because if we look at research income as one example, in our country, that's broken into 4 general buckets. It's got government, industry own purpose, and another classification doesn't matter too much, the detail. And the most tempting thing is to set individual targets for each of those areas of income and say, we were at that last year, we're going to be at that next year, and that's the signal for growth. But the moment you do that, you set up very direct and sometimes perverse incentives for the people that are at the front line to chase one particular type of partnership over another. And similarly, philanthropy or philanthropic donations does not sit in my team, it sits in another team. But we have, in my team, he'll hear me say constantly that we don't actually care who gets the credit for a philanthropic donation. We care if the university wins. And similarly, as reflecting on an earlier comment, mostly, by and large, external partners aren't investing to get something from me. They're doing so to get something from the academic staff. They want an outcome from them. So anything we do by way of success is really a reflection of building on the success that is achieved in and through other people. So rather than focus on, we do have targets for things like research income, but we don't have many more. We don't have a target, say, for the number of spin-outs or the number of partnerships or things of that nature. What we do focus more on is impact. And that's a bit qualitative. It's not so quantitative, but in many ways is more meaningful, because it doesn't drive behavior in this direction or that direction. It doesn't mean that if people have a choice about how they spend their time, they'll do it in a way to hit a metric, because that's what the bosses said we've got to do. We focus more on how are you working back from a real problem? How are you growing jobs and the economy? Are you changing environmental policy or regulatory policy or social policy, or working back from the kind of goals that a lot of the public would imagine that universities exist to work on, rather than these sort of more granular things. All relevant and all useful things to be able to monitor, and I'll do that too, but I'd really try and steer away from using them as specific targets for the team, because it's just setting up the wrong message about where I'd really like to spend their time. Mm-hmm. So we usually focus more on working back from the partner's needs and helping to support the academic community to do its best in forming relationships that make a meaningful difference to an opportunity or a problem or something that then benefits the society as a whole. And universities around the world are really coming under question about their social license. And so this topic of external engagement and partnerships and translation and so on, it's absolutely critical, but it's also something that can be caught up in the concern about the corporatization of universities and so on. So we just need to be sensitive to that sentiment and work back from what is it that people are wanting? What is the community? What are governments? What are key stakeholders looking for from the university environment? If social license has been eroded, okay, why? And what will it take to restore that social license? For me, this topic, doing your best, working back from real problems, is going to be part of the answer.
Yeah, that's great. Really, really interesting approach. And it resonates a lot, also talking about qualitative impact and thinking about what are we actually achieving. We could probably talk about that another half an hour, but I am a bit conscious of time. And maybe just final question, Dan, I'm always curious about if you reflect back and think about the process, the journeys you've been through and lessons learned. If you had the opportunity to, start again, build an external engagement portfolio from scratch, maybe is there one thing you would do differently, or is there one key lesson that you've carried forward that would translate to other institutions who are listening in?
Oh, no single thing.
You can say two things.
Oh, can I? Okay. Perhaps then I'd start with the mandate from the Vice-Chancellor, without which you can't do much else. And you need that and a commitment that they're going to sustain it for 5 or 10 years. And the other thing would be to not try and lift and shift a model from somewhere else. Even though there are some similarities across universities, I think my recommendation and what I would do in a new setting would be to think very deeply about what makes that university environment unique, and really try and leverage that in the thinking about whatever was built.
I couldn't agree more. Context is so important. Dan, thank you so much. This has been a really enjoyable conversation. Thanks for sharing your honest reflections and your experience, and really looking forward to staying in touch. For those listening in, Dan mentioned Katrina from Macquarie will be doing a workshop at the UIM conference in Stockholm. So really hope to see some of you there. Dan, thank you again very much for your time. I really appreciated it. And thanks to those listening in, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.